Hi, and thanks for stopping by my channel. A Square Pillow Isn't Square, the place where you will learn anything and everything you wanted to know about home dec sewing. Today's video is a quick little tutorial on how to lengthen draperies using bullion fringe. I recently moved into a new house. I already had 4 of these ready-made unlined grommet panels that I got from Target, actually. And I really liked how they looked in the house. I wanted to reuse something I already have, but they are too short. I decided to solve the problem using a contrasting bullion fringe. It kind of gives the same effect as a contrast banding, a contrast fabric at the bottom, but it also adds an element of texture. Before you start this project, look at the bottom of your drapery panel and open up the hem where that bottom fold is, right above the floor. If that fold line looks stained, worn, dirty, has any damage or holes, then lengthening your drapery is not going to work because this was going to be visible on the front. Bullion fringe is actually a great and versatile trim. It's available in so many different sizes, styles, and colors that you can really find one for just about any application. It ranges in length from about 2 inches to 9 inches or more. It comes in solid, mingled, and alternating colorways. It can be formal, casual, it can have a very plain binding or a very decorative one, and it also can be very thin and kind of spaced out, or it can be very lush, full, and dense. When you're shopping for a bullion fringe, select one that has more solid coverage and one that's on the longer side. Something at least 6 inches long will look best. I chose a mingled color that kind of brought the color of the drapery rod and vine up on the drapery rod down to the floor, but you could also use a matching bullion. Okay, you're thinking, great idea, I'll go buy some and just stick it on to get the right length. You totally can do that, but you will not get as good of an outcome than you will if you actually adjust the length of your drapery to make a really custom finish. As you can see here, even if you use a good quality bullion like I have that has good coverage, you're still going to be able to see fabric behind the bullion for part of the length of it and nothing behind the bullion for the bottom of it, and it just doesn't look that good. Ready-made drapery panels are notorious for 2 things. One is being really chintzy on the fabric, and the other is having inconsistencies in the length. I'm going to show you how to deal with both of those things. Another thing you'll commonly find with ready-made panels, especially unlined ones, are a top-stitched bottom hem. Not particularly professional looking, and by using the method I'm going to show you to adjust the length, you're not going to see that top-stitched hem. As I said, this is an unlined drapery, which is going to be the easiest one to work with. The first thing that you need to do is figure out how much fabric you actually have to lengthen your drapery. That will help you know how long your bullion fringe needs to be. Instead of a normal double 4-inch custom bottom hem, I only have about 2.5 inches of hem and barely a 1/2 inch that is turned under on the inside. So I have maybe a total of 3 inches of excess fabric to work with to start with. When you're figuring out how much fabric you actually have to work with to lengthen the drapery, keep in mind that you will need at least 1.5 to 2 inches of fabric just to turn a narrow hem at the bottom. Shorter fabric means longer bullion. In my case, I've determined that 6-inch bullion is going to work really well. Also keep in mind, whatever length bullion trim you use, the binding, the top edge, whether you apply it to the front of the panel or the back of the panel, is going to decrease the overall length of that trim. I generally estimate about 3/4 of an inch of trim that's going to be on top of the fabric and therefore shortening the length of the trim. So now my 6-inch bullion just became about 5-inch bullion. Okay, now that we've gotten all of that planning ahead out of the way, let's get to it. Step 1, carefully clip the threads of your bottom hem. They're particularly thick at the beginning and the end, so be a little bit careful, but you're just going to clip your threads and take out the bottom hem. Using a steam iron, press the folds that came out of the bottom hem the very best you can. Sometimes it is actually really hard to get that bottom hem all the way out, but in most cases it's barely visible, or you can press it out almost all the way. The next thing we're going to do is make sure that our bottom hem is straight. Hang your draperies onto your rod and determine where you want your finished bottom fabric hem to be. In my case, I want my draperies to hang about 1/2 inch from the floor when they're finished. I know I have about 5 inches of bullion, so I'm going to measure up from the floor 5.5 inches, and I'm going to put some horizontal pins about every 6 inches or so, just like you might do if you were hemming a skirt. And that way we're going to get a nice even bottom on our panel. Because the binding of my trim, where I'm going to be sewing this on, is about 3/4 of an inch, I'm going to now trim my fabric to allow me a double 3/4 inch hem. So I'm going to press along the line where I marked those pins, just like you see here. Just kind of fold up your fabric to create a nice line where your pins are, press that into a nice crease, and then measure up from that fold towards the raw edge the amount of hem that you need. Make some marks with a pencil, connect your marks to make a nice line, and carefully trim off the excess fabric, making sure only to cut that layer. Now just press in your double hem and pin that in place, and we're ready to go to the sewing machine. Bullion fringe, like most fringes, have a front and a back. The way that you can tell is one of them is going to be better looking. As you can see on this one, it's subtle, but there is a difference. On this side, if you look carefully, you can see a bunch of horizontal rows of stitching. It's very, very faint, but you can see it. And it's a single layer of thread on each of these horizontal rows. If I turn over the trim on the other side, you can see there's a lot more rows of stitching, and they're double rows. So this is the back of my trim, and this is the front of my trim. And when it comes to bullion fringe, that really only matters if your binding is going to be exposed. In my case, you are going to see the top of the binding, so I have to pay attention to the front and the back. Otherwise, if you're putting this on the back of your drapery and all you're going to see are the little twist ropes, it doesn't matter. We're going to make a nice clean edge to start sewing our trim on. When you get your trim home, if it's been cut irregularly or you've got half of a rope like this, we're going to want to even that off to have a full rope. So I'm going to start by putting a piece of tape around my trim like this, and I'm going to go in between 2 full ropes, and I'm going to cut straight up. And then for a little additional insurance, I'm going to enclose this end. And if you want to trim off any extra tape, you can. And this is my back, and I'm going to start by just folding that over so that I have a nice finished end and a full rope at the beginning of the trim. Whether you sew your trim onto the front or the back of your panel, you just want to sew the binding so that it comes right to the bottom of the fabric. When you're sewing a thicker layer to a thinner layer, if you sew the thicker layer or the trim on top of the fabric layer, it tends to make the fabric pucker. I have found that if you put the thicker layer or the trim underneath the fabric and apply it that way, you end up with a much flatter finish on the front. It is pretty thick when you stop and start this, where you've got a double layer of trim and you've got your fabric hem. So you're going to have to just be patient, probably walk the needle through until you get through the thickest part. And then you just sew just inside that little top hem, and that will also catch in the top of your binding. And make sure the color of your bobbin thread matches your trim binding so you don't really see it. If you want to, or if you have particularly wide binding, so one more row, parallel to that one, close to the bottom fold of the drapery, which is also going to be the bottom of the trim binding. That will make sure that your binding stays nice and flat, and you are finished. There you go. Nothing to it really, and you have really upgraded those ready-made panels to something that looks very beautiful and very custom. Hey, if you like this channel, I am going to unabashedly ask for your support. If you click that subscribe button, that will help me by allowing YouTube to know that my content is worth promoting. It helps support me while I make these videos for you. Thank you so much for watching, and happy sewing.